Hey guys, welcome back to another super low quality video because I don't have a nice camera and I'm a farmer by profession, not a YouTuber. I wanted to talk to you today about exactly that. Why/how I became a farmer. Agriculture is kind of done by a very small number of people, especially in our country. And so it is kind of a novelty, and I figured I would go ahead and share that with you guys today. Before I get started with this story, I want to encourage you to go ahead and subscribe because I make lots of low quality videos and I would love for you to see them. Also, if you have any questions about what I'm about to talk about or farming in general or what I do or my farm, put those in the comment section down below. I also have a Twitter, which is a great place to ask me any questions as well. Without further ado, here's why I became a farmer. So when baby little Sydney was a senior in high school, started looking at colleges, and I knew that I wanted to do something with science. I went to a small private university in Indiana and I got a degree in biology. Yeah. Well, not quite. I was pursuing biology until halfway through my junior year when I suddenly hated lab classes and dreaded having to take down notes of data and whatever else I had to do. I don't even remember anymore because it's been so long since I've been in a lab and I didn't want to do it anymore. Even though it started out as my passion, I kind of found that I hated it. Anyway, I took this class called Crops and Society, and it basically was all about how the food system works and how it is influenced by cultures around the world and how it influences people around the world. I learned about food justice, learned about different issues in the food system for the first time, and learned more about how my food was produced than I ever had known in my entire life. I was amazed at how little I actually knew about where my food came from. Obviously, this also focused on the science side of things, and I loved learning about plants. I discovered that I would rather be a field biologist than a lab biologist any day. But I also realized that I really liked getting my hands dirty. I worked in the school's greenhouse, which was fantastic, and I pretty much had the run of the place. So I would do little experiments, but again, I wasn't very good at keeping data or anything. So most of it was me just teaching myself how to grow things for the first time. Later, I think it was, the summer after my junior year, I had my very first internship, and it was actually a community garden internship. And it was probably the happiest summer of my life up to that point. I was able to help with, I think, 5 other interns, one of whom became my best friend. I was able to live in this small community that we intentionally lived in sustainability mindsets. So we tried to, reuse, reduce, recycle, all of that jazz, as well as be a part of the community. So we ran 2 large community gardens on campus and also worked with a community garden association in that town. We got to work with low-income families, basically walk around and give out produce when we had leftovers, which was such a great feeling. I loved having dirt under my fingernails. I loved having ridiculous tan lines. I loved being gross and sticky at the end of the day and feeling like my muscles were burning because I had actually accomplished something with my body. I loved it and I was hooked. It was my drug. When that summer was over, I was so done with school. I didn't want to do anything else. I was over it because I was so in love with this idea of growing food and giving it to people and watching people eat. And oh my gosh, the first time that I made a meal and everything on my plate, I had a hand in growing. Cannot describe the wonderful feeling. Just mind blown. I had never grown anything of my own before. In fact, up until a couple years before that, I actually hated vegetables and didn't really know how to eat them. And so my life was just changing before my eyes. It was around junior year, around the same time I started going out for that internship, that I realized I didn't want to be a part of biology anymore necessarily, because the only classes I had left were more the pre-med side of things and a lot of lab courses, a lot of freaking data, and I wasn't into it anymore. So I changed my major, and it was one of the hardest things I had to do because honestly I was afraid of the stigma of it being a cop-out major, but what it ended up being was general studies with a focus in biology. So this allowed me to take upper level courses in a million different majors. I was able to learn for the sake of learning. I went to classes that I wanted to go to. I took a beginning Latin class, a beginning Greek class, Who the heck knows why? It was difficult, but I learned so much. I took art classes and business classes and finance classes and all sorts of stuff that honestly, half of it was just because it fit in my schedule, but some of it was because I really wanted to learn. And fast forward quite a few years, most of those classes ended up being so significant and necessary in my day-to-day life as an adult. So I'm so grateful that I did that. So flash forward to after college. I had this job that I was supposed to go back to. It's a super long story, so I won't bore you with those details in this video, but long story short, something happened with the actual job itself, not with me. I didn't get fired, per se, but basically I was, I guess you could say, made redundant, and I did not have a job to come back to. I discovered this 2 freaking weeks before graduation from college. So losing this job also meant that I lost my entire community that I would be coming home to, my housing, obviously any chance of income. It was a really walkable town, so the fact that I didn't have a car wouldn't have mattered, but now suddenly I have nowhere to live and no car. I pretty much lost everything. So I graduated and did the only thing that I had the option to do. Unfortunately, I moved into my parents' basement. And I entered some of the most depressed months that I've had in my life, and it was really sad, and I was really discouraged. But I started thinking about it around, I graduated in December, so a few months after that, I was able to kind of pick myself up a little bit, and I started realizing that there was this idea I'd always had in my head that I'd always wanted to bring to people, and that was that you can grow your own food with no matter what kind of space you have, no matter what kind of resources you have, you can grow your own food with basically nothing. And I had been preaching this forever. I'd been trying to tell people this in college, and when people would ask what I wanted to do after graduation, it was, oh, eventually I want to bring farming, bring urban gardening to these low-income people who live in the inner city. Maybe they live in an apartment and don't even have a yard. I want to teach people how to do urban agriculture for their own good and for the good of our communities. And I started realizing that this was the time to start practicing what I preached. And so I asked my parents, hey, can I plant some stuff around your house? But it was a huge problem in the beginning because they were renting. So it wasn't even a property that they owned, which meant no tilling, no rearranging the landscaping, no digging up the yard. So I got to put to work a lot of the stuff that I learned way back in that crops and society class. Basically, I would prune back the bushes that couldn't be moved, and I would plant in the little tiny spaces around them. I would plant greens, and I even grew, I remember I grew some cucumbers around this big, like, you know those big evergreen bushes that people put in their yards? They had one, and I planted cucumbers around it so that they would grow up like vines over the sides of this bush. And so I was just using what was already there as my trellising. Again, remember I had no job, and no car to get to a job. So I just used what I had. I couldn't invest anything in it. I didn't have a greenhouse, so I started stuff in the winter in old plastic jugs. I took things out of my parents' recycling bin and used it as mini greenhouses. I got a recycled kiddie pool and filled that up and made a container garden. I used old buckets and dollar store containers. You would not believe how ratchet this urban farm looked. And the funny thing is, I did terrible financially. I barely brought in any income from week to week. I went into a farmer's market and I actually ended up getting in for free. Long story, but overall I ended up having it the fee was kind of donated to me, which was fantastic. But even with that being free, I probably lost money that year, to be completely honest. But the fact of the matter is, I loved it with every fiber of my being. It was almost as good as that summer I spent in my internship. I knew that this is what I have to do. This is what I have to do with my life. Fast forward to the next year, I finally was able to move. I only ended up living with my parents for 8 months, and I was able to move on to that job that I told you about, that something had happened with it and I lost it. Again, super long story, but I eventually got to go back. So while I was in this tiny little town about an hour away from where I had been living with my parents, I got the opportunity to, there was a church with a lot of land. It was kind of a rural community, so this one church sat on the corner of what was basically a bunch of cornfields. They let me have a plot of land. And I was gonna start a community garden there for the entire city. And when I say entire city, I mean 3,000 people. This was a very small town. So I happened to be working with some of the youth in the town with a nonprofit and some other organizations, and I was able to wrangle them up and teach them a little bit about planting. I started this community garden and I invited people to it from different apartment complexes to different churches to, I worked in a coffee shop at the time, so I would advertise there, and I actually got a little bit of interest. So we started this garden with no tools, no infrastructure, and just a whole lot of hope. And it was not by any means a thriving community garden. In fact, about halfway through the summer, all of the interests that I had, those people just dropped like flies. They stopped coming, they stopped communicating with me or responding to my texts, and honestly, it was so frustrating. But the moments that I spent out in that garden with the teens that I was working with, the teens who a lot of them didn't have the best home lives, didn't have these kinds of opportunities with their families, were able to come and bond with me and pull the weeds and plant the seeds and water the garden. And those moments just instilled in me a whole new passion. I still loved the actual getting your hands dirty and growing your own food side of it, but suddenly I realized this deeper, more meaningful passion for farming, and that was working with people who need that type of relationship. And need some guidance on how to grow their own food, but not just for the sake of having food and fresh local food to eat, but also for the sake of how soothing it is. You see, growing your own food is good for your soul, it's good for your psyche, for your brain. It's just so good. And I wanted to bring that to people. I wanted to bring that to communities. So I kept going until fall. And I probably would have tried to continue on with it, but I got engaged. So we started making preparations for our marriage, which was going to take place in October, and I would be moving an hour north to a different location, so that community garden unfortunately fizzled out and it was done. I actually married a youth pastor. So he is in charge of taking care of this wonderful group of kids who, again, similar to my group of kids down in this other town, have kind of horrible home lives, most of them. Their parents aren't really involved, or if they are, they have so many issues that these teens a lot of times don't know how loved they are. And so as I moved up here and knew that I still wanted to pursue farming, I knew that a huge part of that was going to be my involvement with the teens in my husband's youth group. And as I built rapport with them, I was also searching for land and searching for ways to start farming with little to no money. And so actually it all kind of came together in that the church that my husband is a pastor at had some leftover land and said, hey, why don't you ask the board? And I asked the board and they said, absolutely, here's 1/3 of an acre. And that is where I am today. So starting last year, the winter and spring of 2017, I started a farm called Golgi Farm, LLC. And this is my second year. So this is the first time that I had a fall season and a winter that I was able to follow through and have my first ever second season in the same plot of land ever since college, when I've wanted so desperately to do that. So it's been fantastic. The farm made a very, very, very small profit in its first year. So unlike a lot of businesses, I was able to actually keep a little bit of money instead of losing money in the first year, which was a huge blessing. And I've actually gotten a little bit of interest from those teens in helping out, so that side of the dream is coming true as well. This year, my kind of how my business is spread out, which I can talk more about this in another video, but just a really quick rundown. I sell at a farmer's market in my town, about 3 minutes away from my house. Secondly, I sell to one restaurant, and I'm working with 2 others to start selling to them later in the summer. And then third, probably my biggest source of revenue, and what I would like to eventually be for sure my biggest source of revenue, is my CSA. I will do a future video on CSA and what it stands for. It's Community Supported Agriculture, if you were wondering, but I will definitely do a video on that in the future. I have this small community of people who every single week are committed and are getting produce from me straight off the farm. Regardless of what's growing that week, they're getting what I produced. So it's absolutely fantastic. It's my favorite thing in the world, and it is my pride and joy. And I just wanted to share with you guys kind of what that looks like and where it came from and why I'm here. So if you're new to my channel, subscribe because I do make more videos like this. But if you've been here since the beginning, which has honestly only been a couple of weeks or months, but if you've been kind of following me and wondering like, where did this random girl come from and since when is she a farmer? That's my story. And I just kind of want to encourage you guys to, if you are interested in this kind of thing, if you are thinking like, I could never make the switch, I can't just like quit my job and farm, just grow something. Plant a seed. Grow one crop. Grow something just for your family. And if you have excess, try to give it away or maybe sell it. Start researching. Just get your hands in the dirt. Do anything. Just grow something. That's my encouragement to you. That's where I started, and I didn't make money in the beginning, but here I am. I'm projected to make a little bit more than I made last year, and I'm hoping to just keep building to the point where I can finally be an actual profitable business in my community, serving my community regularly. Thank you so much. If you made it to the end of this video, you might be crazy, but also you're my best friend, so thank you so much. If you'd like to see more of these videos, once again, don't forget to subscribe and give me a thumbs up. It'll make me feel good about my life, so that would be awesome. I now have to leave and go get ready to go to the farmer's market because it's officially that day of the week. So I will leave you guys on that note and see you again in the next video. Till then, go grow something.